what keeps us going and what holds us back. What keeps us going and what holds us back. And it seems like this is a moment, right? Here we are, 76 days from this historic election that we're going to have, right? We're 2 years into this election period, and there's a lot of hope in this time, right? And a lot of possibility. And there's also a lot of death and a lot of destruction. And these are not easy times, and they're not getting any easier. And so I thought a lot about the myths that burden us and that complicate and undermine our ability to be effective peace activists. And I thought it would be a valuable exercise, something for us to do together, is to spend some time dismantling some of these myths together. And so I have 5 that I've kind of cooked up, that I hear again and again from people as we sort of beat ourselves over the head with how ineffective and how small and how aging or whatever we are. So and the first is, in the 1960s, the peace movement was so much more powerful and so much cooler, right, than the peace movement today. And the second is, there aren't any young people in the peace movement. Why don't young people care about these issues? The third, we're marginalized and we're not having an impact. This is just sort of an exercise that we're going through, and we're really not having an impact. The fourth is, we're not smart enough to oppose this war. It's too complicated. It's really tough to get our hands around. And the fifth is, all we really need to do is get the right person into the White House, and they'll enact our solutions for us. I want to say tonight that there are young people who are part of the peace movement, that we are having an impact, and that no one person in any position of power is going to offer any answer automatically or just because they promised that they would. We are the ones that we've been waiting for, and that we are and we need to be creating the alternative. And that if this is what we're doing, if that's really what we're about, and not just going through an exercise of opposition or some sort of knee-jerk resistance or recalcitrance, then we have a long, hard road ahead of us. How come we're not doing what they did back in the 60s? And so this 60s one is a really big one, right? And here we are 40 years later, right? And some things are very much the same, but so much is very, very different. So the Vietnam War was at once more bloody and more popular at the beginning of 1968 than this war is today. We're different today than we were, and our movements need to be different as well. Right? And I think it's a very dangerous and counterproductive combination. Nostalgic amnesia is not a good thing, right? And it infects us, right? It infects our peace movements. It kind of gets in there, and we're tempted to fetishize the past instead of to learn from it, right? And the past, especially this period, right, the 60s, are constantly kind of being rewritten and repackaged and then projected back to us, sold back to us as this sort of distorted reflection of ourselves. So we don't want to recreate 68, and even if we could, and we can't. But we do want to harness some of that energy, some of that sense of power and possibility, and apply that to this very different context and this very different war and wars that we're trying to resist today. And I think that feeds really closely into this second myth, that there are no young people, right? That there are no young people active in the peace movement, and why don't young people care, right? There is a draft, right? There's a whole series of backdoor drafts. There are people fighting this war, and they don't want to be there. They don't want to be there. And they cannot easily and legally leave. They may have volunteered, but they are now drafted. They're doing second and third tours of duties, even that early in the war. That the average lifespan of a 1960s era activist was about 6 months, right? So you turned on, you went to your first protest, you kind of had your world rocked, right? You went to lots of protests, you did the whole thing. 6 months later, you were exhausted, and you were malnourished, and you were sick, and you went home, and you had done it, right? You were finished. You don't end a war in 6-month increments, right? No matter how hard you rage during that period. So just coming back to this question, where are the young people? It's kind of this reflexive and automatic question, right? But it's also heartbreaking in that it misses so much of the incredible and courageous work that young people are doing all over the country. And it says young people are not doing anti-war work, not doing peace and justice work, because they're not doing it with us, right? We're at war, and young people are at the forefront. And it's not just college-educated, debt-burdened college students, right? It's rural and urban high school students who are finding and founding a new generation of students for a democratic society. And there's more and more young people who are in uniform, right? Who are resisting the war. They are, in many ways, calling the cadence of the anti-war movement. And for many of these young people, war obviously is not an abstraction, right? They know what more than 100-degree heat in full body armor feels like. They see the lies that the administration has told up close. It affects them personally. They have tasted fear. They have witnessed and participated in war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan. They've paid the price for this administration's hubris and imperial designs with parts of their bodies and with the wholeness of their minds. They come home haunted, and they come home broken, and they come home really, really angry. And there is an organization, and there is a network that is supporting them. And they are also very, very young for the most part. One of the best things, I'm on the board of the War Resisters League, and one of the best things that WRL has done in the last 10 years is not any of the statements or the demonstrations or any of the good stuff we've done, but it's to sublet a cubicle to Iraq veterans against the war. And so they're in our office, and there's this great kind of dialogue that happens between older generations of principled pacifists, right? People, for whom war is a failure of the imagination is kind of their bread and butter. And then these young soldiers and former soldiers who were attracted to the military, who thought that they would become sort of men and leaders within the military, and then saw how twisted that all became. And so there's this dialogue happening, and this invitation to dialogue that WRL is doing. And I just think it's really great. I think that dialogue makes us so much stronger, and it ensures that next generation of peace activists will be more powerful and more sophisticated than the last, that there will be an understanding of the past, but a looking and moving forward and never back. So myth 3, we're marginalized and we're not having an impact. At a time when the administration was so desperately and is so desperately trying to distract the American people from the war and the economy, these two things have become kind of fused in people's minds. The war and the economy are cause and effect, right? And that we are, and not just the war resisters in New York City, right, but we are part of triggering and directing and sustaining that very valuable discussion, transformative, hopefully, discussion. And it leads to this interesting sense of accountability, right? I'm not just there for me because I oppose the war. I'm there for people who can't be here, right? So we are having an impact, and I think it's incumbent upon us to use it while we have it. We have to dismantle the myth that only the experts can get us out of these wars, right? The notion that unless we formulate a rock-solid, airtight plan for withdrawal from Iraq, one that guarantees and somehow magically ensures that no more blood will be shed, right? If we can't do this, we can't really oppose the war, right? Our role is to say you don't need a PhD in foreign affairs to say that this war is wrong, to say that withdrawal needs to be immediate and complete, to say that we should not be spending our blood and our treasure on wars of preemptive aggression based on lies. And to say, in fact, it's the PhDs and the experts who got us into this war. The armchair warriors, were the ones who said this would be easier.